Welcome everyone to Siyum Seder Horayot, Masechet Horayot and Seder Nezikin. We're very excited to have you all with us. We're very excited to be finishing, for those finishing Horayot, for those finishing the whole Seder, and for those who just came to be part of our Seder, of our Siyum. So our Siyum today is sponsored by the Tannenbaum family in loving memory of their beloved mother, grandmother, Ruth Zemsky, Zechrona Livracha, Rezel Bat Chaya Kela, on her ninth yahrzeit on the 23rd of Elul, marking the completion of Nezikin, a Seder that focuses on Ben Adam L'Chavero, both in the building and healing of society, aptly reflects the life she led. She was a paragon of sensitivity and taking care of the other, often those unseen, in community work and home. Her example continues to inspire us all. Yehi Zichra. And her learning will also be in as a for also the safety of our soldiers, for the safe return of our hostages, and for the refuah shlema of all of our soldiers and other people injured. What we're going to do today is we have a special program. We gathered together a lot of our usual regular teachers to share with us their thoughts at the end of this Seder. So the order is going to be the usual. We're going to finish the Masechet. Then we're going to do the Hadrans. We have a special Siyum Hashas of Julie Mendelson. And so she'll be saying the Hadrans also with us, with her Siyum Hashas. Thank you for sharing it with us, Julie. You've been with us from the very beginning, which is really nice. And we're going to hear from Dr. Ayelet Hoffman-Lipson, Rabbanit El Shimoni. Then we're going to have a little break. Maggie's going to do a little demo about the website, a few words about the website. And then we're going to hear from Alana Stein-Hain, who's going to do an introduction to Seder Kodshim. Felt like this time we really need an introduction before we go into it. We also, those who haven't listened to Ayelet's introduction, that will be one type of introduction, and recommended if you haven't yet listened, it's already up. And Alana will give a bit of a different type of introduction, and then we'll end with the tefillah. So with that, we're going to get started. As you saw from already, we started this morning, very, very interesting end of the Masechet, and it only gets more interesting. So I ended kind of in the middle of the story, and we're going to go back and review a bit of the story outside, and then we'll continue inside from where we left off. We have this story. First, we got a halacha, which is the rules about showing respect for the nasi, for the av beit din, and for the chacham. And we saw that there was a differentiation of what you're supposed to do for each of them. And then they came along and said that, by the way, this all happened in the time of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. It used to be that everyone would walk in, the three of them, and everybody would stand up. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel very secretly, and I would say a little bit deceptively, switched the rules one day when Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Meir, the Av Beit Din and the Chacham, happened not to be in the room. And when they came in the next day, and all of a sudden people were standing up for them in a bit of a different way than yesterday, and it was clear they were being shown less respect than the Nasi, they got very upset. To which Rabbi Meir seems to be the main plotter here, and he plotted and got Rabbi Natan on his side to basically try to trip up Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel by basically saying, let's ask him about Masechet Uktzin, because he doesn't really know Masechet Uktzin, and we can really trip him up. Okay, I wanted to just stop for a moment before we continue with the story and talk about this Masechet Uktzin. I thought of three possible reasons why specifically Masechet Uktzin. First of all, speaking of Siyum Hashas, so Uktzin happens to be the very last Seder of the Mishnah, of the Shisha Sedrei Mishnah. It's the very last one. It's a very short Masechet. Anyway, what Raveni Lau in his book Chachamim, he connects this to the story of Rabbah was asking for rain and wasn't answered in Masechet Tanit. I don't know if you remember this story, but he says, I don't understand because Rav Yehuda just took off his shoes and the rain came, and he knows less Torah than we do. He only knows, interestingly enough, he only knows Seder Nezikin, okay? But we know, and when he talks about Uktzin, he says, that's like Havayot of Rav and Shmuel. Those are things I really don't understand. And we know all the Shisha Sedri Mishnah, and we're even Bikiyum B'Uktzin. Okay, so I thought that it was very interesting to compare this story because we're going to talk about this idea. Is it all about chokhmah? Is that what's important, right? And it was clear about that story is it's not all about being the smartest one in the room, right? It obviously takes other things to get the rain to come. So that was one thing about Uktzin. Another, by the way, the Hebrew word la'akotz, right? The same root is to now I'm blocking the word out, but it's to sting, like to bite, la'akot someone. Okay, so I thought that was interesting in terms of the story. They're basically oktsimoto with Masechet Uktzin. And the third thing is what Uktzin is all about. Uktzin is all about the stem of the fruit, and does it contract tuma, impurity, like the fruit itself? And I was thinking that it's similar to what's going on here because they're not the central character, but they're kind of important, right? That you need these three people in the Beit Midrash, and they're each almost like the handle of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. They want to be treated in the same way, which is the same idea of the stem being connected. So I thought those were some ideas to connect. Anyway, what happens in the story is that then Rabbi Yaakov ben, I have to remember how to pronounce his name exactly, but Rabbi Yaakov ben Kishni, I have to check, but he basically goes and he basically goes to the attic, to the like nearby where Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was living on the second floor, and he starts reciting Masechet Uktzin out loud so that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel will hear. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel gets wind that something weird is going on. He pays really close attention. He learns the whole thing. When they try to embarrass him the next morning, he gets what's going on, and he recites all of Masechet Uktzin, and they realize that they're in trouble. And he says, obviously, I could see, if I hadn't learned this, you would have humiliated me. That's where we ended. And he basically kicks them out of the Beit Midrash. Now, they're out of the Beit Midrash. Sim reminds us of that story of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Let's continue on what happens. So we're about in my Gemara at 6 lines from the bottom. So they start writing questions and they throw them. You can imagine like paper airplanes, and they start throwing them into the Beit Midrash. To have a mifrak, if people were able to answer the question, they answered it. To lo have a mifrak, katav peruke v'shad. Now, when people didn't have the answer, they would write the answer and throw it in the Beit Midrash. Amar lahu Rabbi Yossi, after a while of this going on, Rabbi Yossi says, this is Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. He's often known as the peacemaker. And he says, Torah mi b'chutz v'anu mi b'fnim. This seems very strange. The Torah is outside. We're sitting inside. This doesn't seem appropriate. Amar lahem Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel na'ilinu. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, fine, we'll let them in. Mihu, however, naknesinu delo nimar shmate mishmayu. But you know what? We're going to penalize them and we're not going to say anything in their name. Okay, basically, when we pass down their Torah, we're going to pass it down anonymously. Asiku the Rabbi Meir Acherim. We're going to call it Acherim. You might remember we've had Acherim a bunch of times in the Mishnah, and we say it's Rabbi Meir. Now we finally have the story as to where that came from. Ula Rabbi Natan Yesh Omrim. And when Rabbi Natan says it, we'll say Yesh Omrim. Some say. Now, they have a dream. Seems like Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Natan end up with the same dream. Zilu Faisula Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. In the dream, they're told you should go make peace with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rabbi Natan azo, Rabbi Meir lo azo. So Rabbi Natan goes, Rabbi Meir does. Rabbi Meir, as you could see, is the initiator. He wasn't willing to try to make peace. It's a very strange thing what happens here in another minute, but you'll see. Anyway, Rabbi Meir doesn't want to go. We don't follow chalamot. We don't follow our dreams, right? We don't pay attention to dreams. I'm ignoring it. But ki aza Rabbi Natan, and this is what's a little bit strange. What happens? You expect he's going to go and appease Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Amalei Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, nihida ahani lach kamar da'avuch lemea ve'av beitin shavina chnami nasi. And he goes to appease. You would expect maybe Rabbi Shimon Gamliel would make peace with him, but instead he throws it in the statement that says, what, you think you have the belt of your father? Because your father was a prominent person. He was the Reish Galuta in Babylonia. You think that you can, the exilarch, you think that you can take that and that will make you the Nasi here? No way, no how. Okay? So that was the appeasing, which didn't work so well. Now we fast forward. Okay? The story kind of ends, but we fast forward. We're not done with the story. Manala Rebbe Rabbi Shimon Berei. Okay, remember there's Rabbi Gamliel, who we know, right? We had a recent story with him and Rabbi Yehoshua, and we've had the famous story with him and Rabbi Yehoshua about also kicking people out of the Beit Midrash. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's his son, and then there's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, also known as Rebbe, is teaching Rabbi Shimon some Torah, and he teaches him this Mishnah in Bechorot. Acherim omri, ilu hayat mura lo hayat kachev. You have to go a little bit of background for this, which is there's a halacha of Masir Behema. The 10th animal is sanctified. Now, what if you accidentally count wrong and you count the 9th as the 10th? So the 9th becomes sanctified as well. But the 10th is still sanctified because the 10th is the 10th. But if you take the 10th and you say, well, this will be in place of the 9th one, because the 9th one you call 10, when you realize you miscounted, and you make the 10th the 9th, and then you make the 11th, well, you'll kind of start counting again, and you say 10 is 9 and 11 is 10. So now you have a big confusing situation because you've now called 9th the 10th, and you've also called the 11th the 10th, and also the 10th was really the 10th, even though you didn't call it the 10th. So Rabbi Meir basically says that all of those are sanctified. The ninth, you have to leave till it gets a blemish, and then because the animal has to be sacrificed, but it can't be because it's not really the 10th. The 10th has to be sacrificed like Maser Behema, and the 11th needs to basically be left to be brought as a shlamim, as a peace offering, because it has to be brought as a korban, but not the same one. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with him, and then Rabbi Meir's response, and there's basically Rabbi Yehuda says, what, you're going to make a tamura to a tamura, a substitution of a substitution, because he viewed the 11th as a substitution, to which Rabbi Meir said, Ilu hayat tamura lo hayat karev. You're right, it can't be a tamura of a tamura. There's no substitution of a substitution here. This isn't the 11th is coming in place of the 10th, because what Rabbi Meir said is that since I forgot one point, since the 11th is a shlamim, if you made a substitution for it and you tried to take a different animal in its place, which you're not allowed to do, but the animal would actually be sanctified, to which Rabbi Yehuda said, what are you doing? Not Rabbi Yehuda on the sea, don't get confused. Rabbi Yehuda says, how could that be? It's a tamura of a tamura, a substitution of a substitution. He says, no, if it was really a tamura, then you're right. But I don't view this 11th coming in place of the 10th, right, and bringing it as a shlamim. It's a shlamim. It's not a substitution. Okay, this seems like a very odd, right, thing to be talking about here. Why are we talking about tamura, substitution? I don't know if your brain's working and thinking in these lines, but to me, all of a sudden, what am I thinking about, right? Substitution. We have what's going on here is they're trying to substitute themselves in place of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, right? So we're going to get back to this in a minute, but you can already start thinking. So he quotes Rabbi Meir, but he quotes it in the name of Achirim. Amar lo, mihem alalu shemehem anu shotim u'shmotam ein anu mazkirim. Okay, like a classic child, Rabbi Shimon says, what's going on here? Why are you not mentioning, right? The kids always ask the good questions. That's why I said classic child, right? They key in on the what's going on right away. And he says, who are these people that were drinking their water and their names we're not mentioning, right? It almost sounds like Rabbi Yossi, like how could the Torah be outside and we're sitting inside, right? Things are off kilter here. He says, how are we drinking their water and we're not even mentioning their name? Marley, now we're talking right? We're talking a generation later. They're not even alive anymore, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Natan. Marley, b'nei adam shebikshu la'akor kvodcha ukvod beit avichad. These are people who try to uproot the respect of our family. Amar lahem gam ahavatam, gam sinatam, gam kinatam kfar avda. So comes the son, and he says, but they're gone. They're not alive anymore. Their hatred is not alive, right? Their love, their hatred. It's a pasuk in Kohelet, right? And their kinah, their jealousy is no longer here. So why are you bearing a grudge? They're not even alive anymore. Amar le ha'oyev tamu charabot l'netzach. Okay, their swords, the enemy's swords, will always be here forever. Amar le. Now here he comes, and the son is still kind of fighting about this. And the son says, "But that's Hecha Ahanu Ma'asayu. That's when they're successful. But Rabbanan lo Ahanu Ma'asayu. They didn't even do anything to you in the end, right? They didn't do anything to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel in the end. Nothing happened, right? They tried to humiliate him, but they weren't even successful. So it's one thing if your enemy is successful against you. Yes, maybe that pasuk is relevant, but enough already." So he convinces his father. What does his father do? Almost, okay? Almost pushes him completely over the edge, but he retains one little point. So what happens? Hadran ele amrei mishum Rabbi Meir. And by the way, if you look in that Mishnah Bechorot, it's at the very end of Masechet Bechorot, if you want to look, it says there, Amru mishum Rabbi Meir, this line about the Tamura. Ilu hayat tamura lo hayat karev. He wouldn't say Rabbi Meir said, he said they say in Rabbi Meir's name. Okay, he wasn't willing to go that far, but he got close. Amarava afilu Rebbe da amvatanahu. Tana Amru Mishum Rabbi Meir Amar Rabbi Meir Lo Amar. Okay, he wouldn't say Rabbi Meir said it, even though Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a big anav. He was known for his humility, and he still wouldn't let go of this issue, and he kept it. He came up with this compromise situation. Okay, I think this idea of the Tamura. Okay, I think first of all, there's this idea from the story about the I think the 3 is very interesting. By the way, there's a whole halacha with Maser Behema. If you do it with the 8th and you do it with the 12th, it's not relevant. It's only the 3 because they're close to the 10. And I think there's this idea of, there's the Nasi and then the Ab Beit Din and the Chacham. They were all this threesome, and each one kind of had their place. And right, but what was happening is, right, the 9th was the 10th and the 11th was the 10th, and right, they were trying to move things around. And in the end, of all the things that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is quoting, it's specifically, he quotes Rabbi Meir almost like saying Rabbi Meir should take his own advice, and that the substitution, What he was saying is if it was really a substitution, it never would have been sacrificed. Meaning, if you really had tried to substitute yourself in his place, you never would have succeeded, right? You were trying to put yourself into a place that you didn't belong. Okay, fine. We're going to put this aside for a minute and then we'll come back and pull this all together. So the next part is really talking about different kinds of leaders, okay? Very appropriate for our Masechet. It seems to be here because there's another machlokah between Rabbi Shimon and Gamliel and the rabbis, and we weren't really talking about a machlokah before, but clearly he was in some tension with the rabbis. Okay, this is very famous. Are you better off being someone who has all the knowledge, or you're better off with someone as your leader who is Oker Harim, who has great analytical skills? Okay, uproot mountains. So one said this, one said that. We don't know who said what. Rabbi Yosef, see, now it's interesting. Probably Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was the one who said the Oker Harim because he was the one who didn't have all the Gemara under, right, all the Mishnah under his belt. But we don't know actually. Rabbi Yosef Sinai Rabba Oker Harim. This is very famous, and in fact, it appears in Brachot as well, so it might sound familiar to you. Rabbi Yosef was a Sinai Rabba, was Oker Harim. Shachulit Hamanda. They had to appoint one of them as the Rosh Yeshiva. They sent a message to Eretz Yisrael, and they said, which one should we do? Eze mehem kodem, shachalu Sinai adif. Because everybody needs the wheat. The wheat are the basics. That's the knowledge. Basically, go with the one who has the most knowledge. That's what they said in Israel. But in Babylonia, apparently that wasn't their approach. And this is, by the way, a big difference between, Rabbanit also talks about this in his book, the difference between this is in the newest volume, about the difference between Israel and Babylonia in this sense. But anyway, we don't have the time for this today. Now, according to our version here, and this comes up in different versions in other places, but Rabbi Yosef wouldn't accept the position. Malach Rabba Eslim v'Tartin Shnin. So Rabba was in charge for 22 years until he died. V'Hadra Malach Rabbi Yosef. Then Rabbi Yosef became the head of the yeshiva. V'Chol Shnei de Malach Rabba. Rabbi Yosef afilu umana lebeite lo chalif. He would make sure that the umam would never even, the bloodletter wouldn't come to his house. He basically was trying to show, I'm just like everybody else. Don't treat me with respect. He didn't want to step on the toes of Rabbi. He was very careful, right? Kind of the reaction to that previous story. Abai v'Rabba Rabbi Zera, another story. V'Rabba Barmani, these four rabbis have a yafeh v'abtzrichei resha. They needed someone to lead their learning. Amrei kolda amar milta v'lo mifrach lehavi resha. Here it's all about the knowledge. Anyone who can ask a question and who can say something, and we won't knock down his, we won't question what he said, will be in charge. Jekulu ifrach, everything everybody said, they knocked down. But to Abai lo ifrach, and therefore Chazi Rabba la Abai degava resha. Bunch of different interpretations here, but we'll just go with Rabba saw that Abai lifted up his head as if, oh, I guess it's me. Amar le Nachmani ptach ve'ema. Nachmani, open up and speak. Oh, a whole bunch of different opinions about whether Nachmani was a derogatory phrase about him or it was actually a respectful phrase about him. But again, we'll put that issue aside right now. In the end, he ends up being the one to lead. It sounds like it wasn't like heading the yeshiva there. It was just leading their group. Now we're going to end in a very, very interesting way. Ibayalu. And I challenge you to look and see if any other Masechet ends with this last word. Okay, I don't believe it's true, but I might not remember. Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Bar Matna, Heminayu Adif. So we have Rabbi Zera, we have Rabbi Bar Matna. Who is the better leader? Rabbi Zera, so which one? Rabbi Zera, Charif Umakshe. He's very sharp and he has very strong questions. Rabbi Bar Matna, Matun, he's much more tamed, controlled, umasik, but he concludes, right? It's very good to ask a lot of questions, but you might not come to conclusions. So which one? And the Gemara answers with Teku. We don't know. So what is going on at the end of this Masechet? It's a fascinating end, and particularly because of our Masechet in general. What's going on here is we had a whole Masechet about leadership and leaders making mistakes and leaders learning from their mistakes, right? If we take the story of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, right? Rabban Gamliel in the beginning is kind of living in his elitist world, doesn't even bring enough food, ends up eating from the person who doesn't really have a lot, right? Who's poor in general, but was smart enough to bring food, right? And in the end, he sees the other side and he realizes and he puts up at the head of the yeshiva these other people and he says, really leadership is not about respect and it's really about working hard. And he does this shift. And I think what's going on here is this idea about leaders. Number one, I think there's a concept here of the whole end of the Masechet is different people are different, right? And some people have these strengths and some people have those strengths. And what's the best recipe for a leader, right? Believe it or not, they didn't know it then. We still don't know what the recipe for the true leader is. We're always struggling with this question. Who will be the best leader? Otherwise, right, we'd have an obvious, clear leader all the time and everyone vote for the same person, but it's not so clear. Some people think this person, some people think that person. And it's always a struggle to figure out, right, how to find the right leader. But in the end, I think they end with Teku saying in the end that it's all about the leaders, like sort of saying that we're not going to find the perfect leader. And we talk about this a lot at the end of Masechet, that the end of Masechet often ends with there's a lot of things that are not clear, that are not black and white. And in the end, our leaders are going to be who they are. Each one has their strengths, and they each have to learn, if we go back to our Masechet, that it's all about finding the right path and recognizing your mistakes and moving forward and learning from your mistakes and bringing the korbanot and moving on, right? And nowadays we don't have korbanot, but we do have the Yamim Noraim, which are coming up in that time of year where we do our introspection and, might do it on a daily basis, but also particularly this time of year. And I think that our Masechet is ending with this idea of nothing is perfect, and yet we always have to strive at least to try to get to the closest we can to perfection. So that's some idea to leave you with this Masechet. With that, Hadran alach Kohen Mashiach, Slik ala Masechet Horayot. So I'm going to say the Hadrans right now, and we'll bring them up, and also Slik ala Masechet Seder Nezikin. Okay. So if you're finishing the Seder, you'll say the whole thing. If you're finishing just Horayot, you could just say Masechet Horayot. And if you're here just watching, you can just listen. Okay. Here we go. And then I'll invite Julie up. After we do the first three Hadrans, Julie will say a small dedication, and then she'll say her third Hadran. Hadran alach Masechet Horayot v'Seder Nezikin v'Hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Horayot v'Seder Nezikin v'Da'atach alan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Horayot v'Seder Nezikin v'lo titnashe minan lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Horayot v'Seder Nezikin v'Hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Horayot v'Seder Nezikin v'Da'atach alan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Horayot v'Seder Nezikin v'lo titnashe minan lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Horayot v'Seder Nezikin v'Hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Horayot v'Seder Nezikin v'Da'atach alan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Horayot v'Seder Nezikin v'lo titnashe minan lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Okay, Julie.
Okay. I'm so honored and really overwhelmed to be here with my esteemed teacher and teachers and all the students. And I wrote a piece and I hope you'll read it. It's on the website. But I just wanted to say a small dedication. When I started learning Daf Yomi, I thought it was for me. But now I realize it wasn't for me. We learned in the Torah yesterday in Kitavo that if we want to keep the blessings of this land, we need to keep the whole Torah. And how can we keep it if we don't know it? The Talmud isn't something that belongs exclusively to yeshiva students. It's for all of us. And I feel an obligation to acquire this knowledge and pass it on as a link in a chain from generations past to our generation to future generations. I want to dedicate my Siyum to all those soldiers and civilians who started this Daf Yomi cycle and didn't get to finish because they were killed in this war. And to some very close friends, fellow learners who we lost along the way to illness. We just learned a few days ago in Horayot Daf Vav, Ein mitah b'tzibur. There's no death with regard to a congregation. Those individuals finished their job in this world, but we, the congregation, have to continue to learn and to act in their memory and in their merit, and that's what we're going to do. Hadran alach Masechet Horayot, Seder Nezikin, v'Talmud Bavli, v'Hadrach alan. Da'atan alach Masechet Horayot, Seder Nezikin, v'Talmud Bavli, v'Da'atach alan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Horayot, Seder Nezikin, v'Talmud Bavli, v'lo titnashe minan, lo ba'alma haden, v'lo ba'alma hadate.
יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, שתהא תורתך אומנותנו בעולם הזה, ותהא עמנו לעולם הבא. חנינה בר פאפא, רמי בר פאפא, נחמן בר פאפא, אחי בר פאפא, אבא בר פאפא, רחמן בר פאפא, Rachish bar papa, Surcha bar papa, Ada bar papa, Daru bar papa. הערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפיות עמך בית ישראל. ונהיה אנחנו כולנו צאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל. כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. מאוהבי תחכמני מצוותיך כי לעולם היא לי. יהי ליבי תמים בחוקיך למען לא אבוש. לעולם לא אשכח פיקודיך כי בם חייתני. ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך. אמן, 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 סלע ועד. יהי רצון לפניך, אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתני לסיים מסכת הוריות וסדר נזיקין, כן תעזרני להתחיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים יעמוד לנו ולזרענו, שלא תמוש התורה מפינו ומפי זרענו עד עולם. ויתקיים בנו, בתהלכך תנחה אותך, בשוכבך תשמור עליך, בהקיצות אי תשיחך. כי בי ירבו ימיך, ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינה, שמאלה אושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו השלום. Asher kochachem. Mamash, wow. It's a huge chesed to finish Seder Nezikin and Masechet Horayot, which might have been a small Masechet, but it was not so simple. Okay, we're just going to read the first line, and I just want to point out one small thing, especially because we have Alana's intro today, so I don't need to do much about Zvachim. But kol Zvachim shenizbachu shelo lishman ksherim, ela shelo alu labaalim l'shem chova. Okay, the Masechet starts off with this idea of something lo lishma, about having the wrong intent. And what I just want to point out, I'm not going to even go into the details of this, but what's fascinating always to me is the big shift, even though we did have a whole bunch of kind of preparation for Zvachim, as we talked about in Horayot, but there's a huge switch because one of the main themes of Seder Nezikin was Adam U'al Olam. You're responsible for your actions, Bein B'Shogeg, Bein B'Mezid, it doesn't matter. But the Zvachim, Shenizbachu Shelo Lishmam, all of a sudden we enter the world of Zvachim, and your intent becomes super important. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind as we go through Seder Masechet Zvachim and learning about all about the intention being important as opposed to your actions being important. I think it's a big shift between the two.